The dirt from my father's grave was still fresh on my heels when Marissa slid the document across the reclaimed walnut table. She didn't even wait for me to remove my black mourning coat. It was a formal eviction notice, 30 days to vacate the premises. Marissa sat there calmly, sipping a vintage Pinot Noir from a crystal stem, wearing my dead mother's gold locket like a trophy. "You're a remnant of a past I'm erasing," she said, her voice smooth and precise, the way poison always is. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at her. She thought she had already won. She was wrong. To the outside world, Marissa was the devoted second wife who had lovingly cared for my father, Thomas Hale, during his final agonizing year. In reality, she was a parasite who had finally finished draining the host. Over the last 12 months, she had systematically isolated him in the west wing of the Redwood Hollow estate in northern Oregon, firing the nurses I hired and replacing them with staff who answered only to her. She controlled his phone, his visitors, even his pain medication. She played the role of the grieving woman flawlessly, arriving at doctor appointments in tailored cashmere, while I stood outside in the freezing rain, pruning vines until my fingers cracked and bled. That was the arrangement. Marissa curated the illusion of wealth. I maintained the substance of it. I was 25 years old, a junior enologist, and the only person on that land who knew the difference between a Cabernet Franc and a Merlot vine. While Marissa quietly liquidated my father's assets to fund her collapsing socialite fantasy, I was the shadow moving between fermentation tanks, checking sugar levels at 3 in the morning, negotiating distributor contracts, keeping the Redwood Hollow label alive. People used to ask me why I stayed, why after I turned 18 I didn't pack a bag and disappear. They called me weak. They said I had a victim complex. They didn't understand the invisible chain of a survivor. I didn't stay because I was afraid of Marissa. I stayed because this land wasn't just property to me. It was history. It was my mother's hands in the soil and my father's name carved into the gate. Leaving would have meant admitting that Marissa owned this place. I refused to give her that satisfaction. I wasn't a victim trapped in a house. I was a guardian protecting a legacy. I endured the insults, the silent dinners, the way she looked at me like I was a stain on expensive upholstery, because as long as I stayed, the vines stayed alive. I had been the quiet operator, the keeper of the flame, waiting for the wind to shift. But staring at that eviction notice, realizing she intended to throw me out before my father's body was even cold, I understood something had changed. My silence had expired. Marissa thought she was pruning a dead branch. She didn't realize she was cutting into the root of a plant she never bothered to understand. She wanted a war over the estate. Fine. But she had forgotten one thing. I knew where everything was buried, and I knew exactly which lever would bring the whole house down on top of her. She didn't even wait the 30 days. She started erasing my father immediately. The morning after she served the notice, the slam of a delivery truck door pulled me onto the porch. A luxury consignment vehicle idled in the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as 2 men in white gloves carried out my father's leather armchairs, his collection of first edition maritime maps, and the handcrafted desk where he'd signed the original deed to this land. Marissa stood on the porch directing them, champagne in hand at 10 in the morning. She was liquidating his memory to fund her future. I stepped outside. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice calm, tight. "Those don't belong to you." She laughed, brittle and sharp. "Everything belongs to me, darling. I'm the surviving spouse. You're just a tenant who overstayed her welcome. I'm clearing out the clutter. We need room for the new vision." The new vision arrived later that afternoon, in the form of a developer with a cheap suit and restless eyes. He walked the vineyard like it was dead weight. I heard Marissa outlining her plans. She wanted to bulldoze the south acreage, the oldest Pinot Noir vines in the county, to install a concrete parking lot and a wedding pavilion. "Wine is dirty work," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Mud and bugs. Events is where the real money is. We'll keep a few rows for photos, of course." I felt something turn cold in my stomach. She didn't just want profit, she wanted annihilation. She wanted to strip the soul out of the land and replace it with an empty monument to herself. Marissa had no intrinsic value of her own, no craft, no roots, no patience, so she destroyed what had all three. She was trying to turn a century of history into a fast payout because deep down she knew she was nothing without access to the account. The house felt hollow as I moved through the empty rooms where my father's life had been stripped away piece by piece. I didn't argue. I didn't beg her to stop. I went upstairs, closed my door, and packed a single bag. When I stepped back into the hallway, Marissa leaned against the wall, watching me with a satisfied smirk. "Finally leaving?" she asked. "Good. Make sure you take your trash with you." I smiled back at her. "I'm just getting started," I said quietly. "Enjoy the view while it lasts." Then I turned and walked down the back stairs into the cellar. It was the only place on the estate she never entered. Too cold, too dark, too full of the work she despised. The air down there smelled like oak, earth, and patience. This was my sanctuary. I passed the rows of barrels and stopped at the back wall where a wooden crate was marked 1999, the year I was born. My father had told me since I was a child that he'd laid down 12 bottles of Cabernet that year, waiting for the season to change. The season had changed. It was winter now. I pried the lid loose. Inside the straw, there were no bottles. There was a heavy, fireproof lockbox and a thick envelope with my name written in my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I lifted it out. I sat on the concrete floor and opened the envelope. "Eleanor," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're down here, it means Marissa did exactly what I feared she would." I read the words, and for the first time since the funeral, I cried. Not from grief, from relief. My father hadn't been blind. He'd seen everything. He wrote about the nights he pretended to sleep while she berated me, about the bank alerts he noticed but never mentioned, tracking the money she siphoned from the operating accounts. He explained his silence. I was too sick to fight a war on two fronts, so I played the role she expected. I let her think she was winning. He wrote about how hard it was to watch her treat me like hired help in my own home, but he needed time to build something she couldn't touch. The letter laid everything bare. The silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. He had endured his own kind of torture so that when the moment came, I'd have what I needed. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you loudly, but I protected you legally." Inside the box, he said, was the key. "Take it to Daniel Brooks," the letter ended. "Then take back our home." I wiped my eyes. Whatever softness was left in me stayed on that cellar floor. I stood up, clutching the lockbox to my chest. Upstairs, Marissa was planning to pave over my inheritance. She thought she was the queen of the house. She didn't know the king left the keys underground. I drove straight to the offices of Daniel Brooks, my father's attorney and oldest friend. The lockbox sat in the passenger seat like it belonged there. I didn't call ahead. I walked past the receptionist and into his office. Daniel looked up, saw the box, and exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. He looked relieved. He locked the door behind me. We sat in silence as I entered the code my father had written in the letter. The box opened with a soft hiss. Inside was a flash drive and a document bound in blue legal paper. Daniel adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages. "This is the irrevocable trust," he said. "Your father transferred the entire Redwood Hollow estate, the winery, the brand rights, everything into a trust in your name 3 years ago." "Technically, Marissa has been living in your house for 36 months. I nodded. That much made sense. But then he turned the page. "There's more," he said. "Your father added what we call a poison pill." He slid the paper toward me and pointed to the clause. Marissa was entitled to a generous monthly stipend on the condition of good behavior. If she attempted to sell estate assets or evict the primary beneficiary within 30 days of his death, the stipend would be permanently voided. I stared at the paragraph. My father had weaponized her greed. He knew she wouldn't wait. By serving me that notice and selling his belongings, she hadn't just been cruel, she'd erased herself. "She violated the terms less than 48 hours after his death," Daniel said quietly. "She gets nothing." I leaned back, the precision of it taking my breath away. My father hadn't built a shield. He'd built a blade and waited for her to fall onto it. I looked at Daniel. "She thinks she's selling the house tomorrow," I said. Daniel's mouth curved into a thin, unfamiliar smile. "Then I suggest we inform her she's trespassing." The next morning, exactly 24 hours after she handed me the eviction notice, I walked into the kitchen. Marissa was already there, dressed in a tailored cream suit, seated across from a woman I recognized as a high-end real estate agent. They were laughing over coffee, discussing listing prices and staging timelines. My father's chair had been shoved aside, replaced with sleek modern stools that looked wrong against the old stone walls. Marissa glanced up, her smile tight. "Good morning, Eleanor. This is Claire. She's helping me prepare the property for market. I assume you're packing. You only have 29 days left." Silence was my opening move. I poured myself a cup of coffee, then calmly pulled my father's chair back to the head of the table and sat down. Marissa's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm in a meeting." "Your meeting is over," I replied evenly. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the formal notice from Daniel's office activating the poison pill clause. She scoffed, then began to read. I watched her face change in real time. Confusion, disbelief, then a pale, shaking fear. The silence stretched until it felt heavy. The agent shifted in her seat, sensing the pressure drop. "This is a joke," Marissa whispered. "This isn't legal. He wouldn't do this to me." "He did," I said. "He knew exactly who you were. He knew you'd try to sell this place before the flowers on his grave wilted. So he made sure that if you did, you'd lose everything. The stipend, the allowance, the car. All of it." She stood so fast her chair crashed to the floor. "You little witch," she screamed. "I was his wife. I took care of him. I deserve that money." "You isolated a dying man," I said calmly. "You abused his daughter. You tried to destroy his legacy for a quick payout. You gambled on his illness and forgot to account for his intelligence." I stood. My shadow fell across her paperwork like a gavel. "You gave me 30 days to leave my own home. The trust gives you nothing. But I'm not unreasonable. You have until the locksmith arrives, about 45 minutes. She looked to the agent for support, but the woman was already packing her bag, eager to disappear. "I'm not leaving," Marissa hissed. "You can't make me." "Actually, I can," I said. "The sheriff is on his way to remove a trespasser, and since you voided your own prenup, I suggest you pack whatever you can carry." The sheriff arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't need to touch her. His presence was enough. She screamed about fairness, about sacrifice, about betrayal. But as she dragged her designer luggage down the gravel drive, heels sinking into the dirt she hated, she looked small. When her car vanished down the winding road, the silence returned. This time, it wasn't suffocating. It was deep, like the earth after rain. I changed every lock, then walked out into the vineyard. The sun dipped low, casting gold across the rows. I stood at the edge of the south acreage she wanted to destroy. The soil was cold and alive beneath my boots. The invisible chain that once bound me here was gone, replaced by the weight of ownership, a weight I chose. I brought one of the 1999 bottles with me. I didn't drink it. I poured it at the base of the oldest vine, a gift to the ghosts, for my mother who planted this place, for my father who protected it with silence. People say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. The best revenge is preservation. It's standing in the wreckage of someone else's greed and realizing you're the one holding the future. Marisha wanted to erase the past, to build a monument to herself. I protected the past, to build something lasting. That is the justice of the sower. We don't just cut down weeds, we plant something stronger. I looked out over the valley, my valley, and breathed in the cold air. The war was over, the work was just beginning, and for the first time in my life, I was ready for the harvest. If this story stayed with you longer than the video itself, don't walk away. Subscribe. This channel is for people who actually feel what they hear, and if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them.